Today I want to talk about one of the great gifts we have in this life, friends. I once heard a saying regarding friendship that stuck with me. It went that friends make the good times better and the bad times not so bad. If you think about some of your best friends, did you hit it off right away? Or maybe it took a little time for you guys, your friendship to grow and blossom. Perhaps you grew up together ever since you were little kids. Maybe you met a bit later in life. Do you have perhaps the same sense of humor? Often friends are brought together because they tickle each other's funny bones. Maybe you both share a dry sense of humor or a sarcastic sense of humor, witty sense of humor, highbrow, lowbrow, slapstick. Oh no. Perhaps you've laughed so hard, your cheeks were hurting, you can barely breathe, right? I'm sure you can all remember a time like that. Perhaps your friendship grew through some shared experiences. Hopefully some really good shared experiences. Sometimes some bad shared experiences. Or maybe just some really random shared experiences. I had one where one of my best friends in high school, growing up, he was a bit older than I was. He went off to Ambassador College, came back over the summer, and brought his girlfriend who was from the opposite side of the country where I was living. So we're together on a Saturday night. We have the next day, Sunday, off, and we're thinking, what should we do? What should we show my friend's girlfriend of the Northwest where we lived? So as we're sitting at dinner on Saturday night, we decide we should go to Seattle. What a great idea. This is 3+ hours away from where we were at the time. And as you can tell, this was a really well thought out plan since we're sitting at the dinner table when we conceive of this 3-hour road trip that we're going to take. But we're going to drive up there after dinner, we think, and we'll get in around midnight. We'll just stop the side of the highway somewhere at a hotel, get a room, and then we'll have all day Sunday to explore the great city of Seattle, all the great sights and tourist attractions. So we get in the car, we have a lot of fun listening to music and telling jokes, and we get up close to the Seattle area around midnight, pull off the highway at a Holiday Inn or some such place, go inside and ask for a room. Sorry, we are completely sold out. No rooms available. Seafare. You go, okay, that's odd. Let's go up the road, the next exit or two, we'll find another hotel. Pull off, ask for a room, same thing. We repeat this for about 5 or 6 times over the next 2 hours and find there's no rooms available anywhere in the Seattle area because of Seafare, which we'd never heard of. Seafair, it turns out, is this huge festival that they have in Seattle and Lake Washington. Apparently, it's a big deal. If you're from there, you'll have heard about this. I had not. So we end up finally about 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, deciding there's no rooms available anywhere in an hour's direction. By the time we're going into the hotels now, they just laugh when they see us coming, and asking for a room. And decide, okay, we're going to turn around and head back home. So we start driving back the way we'd come, 3 hours, get back in around 6 a.m., dawn, the sun is coming up, we've been up all night, and literally 5 miles from the house, we finally see one of these little roadside motels with a vacancy sign, and we're hours away from Seattle. And so this is one of our epic stories we tell and retell and laugh over, our road trip to nowhere that went all night long, and is a great memory of our friendship. Perhaps you have a similar experience that you can reflect upon as I share that with you. Of course, as we get a bit older in life, we find many good friends are separated by work, life, family, geography. You live perhaps thousands of miles away from some of your closest friends. But when we get a chance to get back together, we often comment that it's like no time has passed at all. Perhaps you see that when you're at the Winter Family Weekend, or you're at the Feast of Tabernacles, or wherever you might be when you get to reconnect with an old friend of yours. Let's turn over to Proverbs chapter 18 as we start today. There's a verse here right at the end of this chapter, verse 24, that speaks about friendship that I'd like to read with you as we start here today. Proverbs 18, verse 24. It says, "A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother." The first part of this verse reminds us of the golden rule. To have and maintain good friendships, we have to treat people in a good and friendly way. You won't be able to have good friends if you treat people poorly, or you're a real jerk. They just won't last. The second part here reminds us of the value of a true friend. We can't pick our families, and sometimes certain family members can be a real challenge. But it's possible to build a depth of friendship that's greater even than that of family. And I hope most of you have been or will be blessed with a friend like that in your life. As I was reflecting on this topic today and preparing this message, I realized I likely don't need to dedicate any time in my sermon today to tell you how to spend time and have fun with your friends. I bet all of you have pretty well got that figured out. But sometimes being a friend isn't all fun and games. Sometimes you have a friend who's going through a trial or a series of trials. Sometimes you have a friend who gets off track in life. Sometimes we get off track in life, which can have a negative impact on our friendships. Today I want to spend a little bit of time in my message exploring the serious side of friendships. I've entitled this message, "The Duties of a Friend." The duties of a friend. As we start to look into this topic, I want to start with a common situation. What if your friend is going through a trial? Is going through a really difficult time in their life? As we know, trials come in all different shapes and sizes, whether your friend is in the church or not. People have trials at their work, trials at school, health trials, housing trials, financial trials, family, relationship trials. And of course, many of these types of trials can be just time and chance, circumstances. Someone's caught in the midst of a layoff at their company. Mergers and acquisitions happen all the time. Good worker, everything was going fine, and all of a sudden, they're out of work. How can you support your friend when they're facing a serious trial? Let's turn over to the book of Job. Job was a man who faced some serious trials, some of the worst recorded. Let's go to Job chapter 2. Job chapter 2, and we're going to look at verse 11 here. Job had a few friends who came to visit him in his time of trial. Job chapter 2, starting in verse 11, it says, "Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they'd made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him." So I imagine when Job was doing quite well prior to this trial arising on him, he had many friends, hundreds, thousands, probably acquaintances who would call themselves a friend to Job. But here we see when Job lost everything, there were three who came to visit him and to comfort him and to mourn with him this terrible time. We see here verse 12, when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. They cried with their friend Job. Each one tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head towards heaven. Verse 13, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. And these three good friends come to be with Job, take a week off from whatever it is they were planning to do because their friend was hurting. Now, the response here that we see, at least at the start, sounds like something right out of a Men Are From Mars class. The guys get together and they don't talk about it for 7 days. And I certainly know some of the guys, they were good friends of mine who were going through something. Sometimes we'd get together and not talk about whatever was going on for a little bit, do something else, let the brain kind of ruminate on it in the background. Of course, like Job does in coming chapters, they do talk about it in time when they're ready, often in less than 7 days. And Job certainly went through an incredible set of trials here. And of course, this is a stereotype. There are certainly some women who prefer to take time to think things through before they're ready to discuss a difficult trial with a friend. But regardless of how long it takes before somebody's ready to talk about their trial, we can be a good friend by listening with empathy and compassion. You know, sometimes that's the greatest gift we can provide our friend, to listen to them, to let them know that we care. And as the old saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. Of course, this is also a great opportunity to share some encouragement with your friend. One of the most encouraging things we can do for our friend who's going through a trial is to pray for them. I won't turn there. James 5:16, a well-known verse, reminds us to pray for one another and tells us the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Your prayers can really make a difference for your friend. So let your friend know that you'll be praying for them and what you'll be asking God to help them with. You know, being specific makes a statement a whole lot more powerful. If you have someone who comes to you and says, "I'll be praying for you," that's very nice. It's a good statement. It feels good to hear that when you're going through a difficult time. But it means a lot more if they say, "Hey, I'm going to be praying for God to heal you from this sickness, and that he gives you wisdom and peace of mind as you consult with the doctors in these coming days on a treatment plan, and that God also softens the heart of your boss as you talk to him about needing to take time off work these next few days as you work through this situation." That's a whole lot more powerful to hear from your friend than just a generic, "I'll be praying for you." Be specific. Tell them what you're praying for, what you're asking God to help them with. It'll mean a lot to them. While we're here in Job, let's go down a little farther to chapter 6. Chapter 6, and we'll go to verse 14 here. Job's talking to his friends. Job makes a statement here in verse 14 of Job chapter 6. It says, "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty." What does this mean? When our friend's going through a difficult time, even if they're getting off track in life, the kindness of a friend means a lot. It's one of our duties as a friend to each other, to be there for one another during those hard times. And what does this mean? If you drop down a little bit farther in this chapter to verse 24, notice Job's words here. He says, "Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred." We see here that Job had an expectation of his friends to explain a mistake if he was making one. This leads us to another topic to consider under the duties of a friend. What if your friend is making a mistake? What if your friend is sinning, has gotten off track in their life? Let's turn over to James chapter 5, if you would. Pardon me. James chapter 5, we'll look at the last two verses here of this chapter, verses 19 and 20. James writes here, he says, "Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins." These verses here remind us of what our motivation should be if we see a friend getting off track. It's definitely not fun, but if we love our friend, verse 20 reminds us that certainly for our converted friends, this is a matter of eternal life and death. The verse goes on to show the good result, a friend saved from death and covering a multitude of sins. Interesting, this covering of sin may apply to both parties here, your friend and to you. For your friend, obviously repenting and returning to the faith, getting back on track with God, cuts off a whole path of sin that they were going down previously. And for you, certainly God indicates a blessing here and other scriptures as well for those who love their neighbor as themselves. It speaks of mercy given. I'm sure we would all welcome an extra portion of mercy when our judgment comes. One other verse that speaks to this duty of a friend is found over in Proverbs chapter 27. Let's turn there as well. Proverbs chapter 27, and we're going to read verse 6 here together. Proverbs 27, verse 6. It says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." This verse reminds us that true friends are faithful, even when they have to share something that's hard to hear. You know, your friend is going through a tough time. They can get all sorts of people to agree with them about anything. You can get that at work or at school. You can find that online. Anything that's on your mind, you can explain why whatever the situation is, it's not your fault, is the only thing you could do under the circumstances, and why you're justified in your sin, whatever it might be. And they'll find plenty of people who will agree with them and cheer them on for whatever poor decision they're making. Flatter them and agree with them. But those people don't really care about that person. If you care about that person, if you're going to be a faithful friend, you have to be willing sometimes to have the hard conversation, to talk about the difficult position they're in and the mistake or sin that they've made. Drop down to verse 17 in this chapter while we're here, also in Proverbs 27. This perhaps is one of the most famous proverbs on friendship. It tells us, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. You aren't sharpening the countenance of your friend by going along and acting like everything's fine when they slip up and are sinning. If you're going to be a faithful friend, if you're going to be a friend who's worth having in bad times, good times and bad, then if you see something, you have to say something. So how do you approach having a difficult conversation of this type? Since we're here in Proverbs, let's look at another one for a moment. Proverbs chapter 15. In verse 1. We often look at this scripture and we think about someone in an argument, perhaps. Proverbs 15, verse 1, it says, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." A soft word is certainly called for in a time like this. This usually means that we need to take time to pray, meditate, and very carefully consider our words in order to ensure that we're coming to our friend with a soft answer and a loving spirit. Your friend and your friendship are at a delicate stage when you're in this type of a situation, and it's worth doing your preparation in order to seek the best outcome. I'm sure we can all think of times when somebody may have been right, but they presented it in a wrong way or in a harsh way and didn't get a positive outcome in their conversation. If we care about our friend, we need to make sure that we're coming in a soft and gentle manner and with a good spirit out of love and concern for our friend when we're addressing this type of situation. Of course, we also have some verses that are recorded for us in Matthew chapter 18 that talk to us about how to deal with this type of a situation, especially if it's a friend or someone who has sinned against us. Let's turn over there together as well while we're considering this topic. Matthew chapter 18. We have some words from Jesus Christ here, starting in verse 15, about this topic. Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 15. It says, "Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he hears you, you've gained your brother." This is showing us that we should first try to handle situations privately between brethren or between friends if something arises. Verse 16 goes on. It says, "But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established." And finally, verse 17, "If he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector." This set of verses here describes, we might call an escalation path, so to speak. But of course, the very first verse is try and work it out yourself before we start moving up the ladder, so to speak. And this is good advice regardless of the nature of your friend's sin, and one that I think is often followed. I believe the vast majority of these types of situations are handled privately and successfully, compared to the few which have to be escalated to involve more people or ultimately to become a church matter. Now let's flip this topic on its head for a moment, examine it from a completely different angle. What if you're the one making the mistake? What if you're the one who's sinning? Wait a minute, that's impossible, right? Afraid not. Only Jesus Christ was perfect. That means that this is bound to happen on occasion for everyone, even you, even me, despite our best intentions. We therefore have to recognize that we all need and deserve correction from time to time. Now, our natural reaction to criticism is to become defensive. It's part of our human nature. I heard a sermon one time talked about this is a real spiritual measuring stick of how we're maturing as Christians. Is how do you react when you're criticized? Do the walls go up? Do you start to point out to the person delivering the news all of the places where they fall short and why their feedback is not really valuable or accurate? You know, if a friend comes to us with correction, we need to appreciate that that person is trying to look out for you, trying to be their brother's keeper. That's not always an easy job. Now, the correction being offered may be accurate, may be inaccurate. And if the correction offered is not correct, are you then going to act in an unchristian way in your response? Perhaps be guiltier of sin than the person who came to you with good intentions? Let's walk through a few possibilities logically here for a moment. Say the person coming to you, your friend, say they're correct. You have slipped up. You've made a mistake. What's a spiritually mature response to that? You acknowledge it and work to correct the problem. And of course, it's certainly easier to do if the person approaches you softly and kindly. But even if the approach isn't the best, we should be wise and accept it. You and the person may pray for each other and develop a closer relationship for having gone through and shared that experience. Let's look at the other side for a moment. What if the person coming to you offering correction is mistaken, isn't correct? Well, you may be able to offer some additional information where the person sees that he or she was incorrect. And if the person still believes you're wrong, you could certainly tell them that although you don't see it as they do, you will carefully consider their input and thank them for coming to you anyway, having the courage to come and talk to you about it. Now here's where it gets really complicated. What if it's a little of both? What if it's not quite so black and white that they're entirely correct or they're entirely wrong? And many times these situations fall into this category. A lot of people use that as an excuse to throw out the part that's true because it's packaged in some inaccuracies. But if we're going to be wise and good friends, we need to reflect and take that kernel of truth and learn from it. Regardless of the mix, correct, incorrect, we need to learn to receive feedback gracefully. Now, we've talked about a variety of situations here. You've probably thought about a number of friends in your life as we've talked through some of these today. But I'd like us to consider one more friend, which we happen to all share here today. Let's turn over to John chapter 15 and verse 15. John chapter 15 and verse 15. Here are some of the words of Jesus Christ. We often read through much of this chapter during the Passover service each year. In John 15, verse 15, Christ says, "No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. But I've called you friends, for all things that I've heard from my Father I've made known to you." Jesus Christ states here that he is our friend. He's brought us into the circle, so to speak, shared with us the words and the plan of the Father. Now, thankfully, we never have to worry about a situation where our friend Jesus Christ sins and falls short. He's perfect and the captain of our salvation. But on the flip side, our friend Jesus Christ takes his duties as a friend to us very seriously, in the same manner as what we've reflected upon here today. Let's turn over to Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3. Notice verse 19. These are some words from Jesus Christ embedded in his message to the church of Laodicea. Certainly applicable to all, as we'll see. Revelation chapter 3 and verse 19, Jesus Christ says, "As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Therefore be zealous and repent." Notice this isn't as many as I love in Laodicea, I rebuke and chasten. It's as many as I love. And we know he loves us. He gave his life for us. And he says he's a friend to us. And that means that because he loves us, when he sees us falling short, he does rebuke and chasten us. Now, rebuke sounds very sharp to us. It's not a common term we use in modern English. It sounds like a harsh word as we read it, perhaps. But that's not the intent. The intent, Christ, he's going to show us if we're getting off track, if we're willing to listen. As Mr. Demarest said in his message today, the Holy Spirit leads us. Doesn't drag us, doesn't force us, doesn't coerce us. It leads us. Christ rebukes and chastens those he loves. Are you listening? When was the last time you realized that Christ was correcting you? We already covered a few minutes ago that we all make mistakes and sin from time to time, despite our best intentions not to. So it's not because you've been perfect for the last year or 5 or however long it was since you last recognized Christ was chastening you. Do you have a tender heart that's willing to take correction gracefully, humbly, when your friend comes to you? God offers this, Jesus Christ offers this to you because he wants you to be a part of the family, part of the family of God, because he wants you to make it. That's why your friend is there. They want you to succeed and be successful. Jesus Christ wants you to succeed and be successful in your Christian journey. Let's turn over to one other scripture in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. We see a passage here that speaks to this same concept starting in verse 5. Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 5. It says, "And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him." Sometimes we can feel that way. We get off track, or when we see we're being chastened or rebuked by Jesus Christ. Verse 6 says, "For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives." The fact that he's willing to take the time to correct us, to teach us, is because he loves us. If he didn't love you, He'd leave you alone. I don't care whether they make it or not. He does care. He wants you to succeed. Same as any loving parent would, or in this case, our older brother. Go on, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? We see here it's because he wants us to be part of his very family, that he's willing to have that tough conversation with you from time to time when we need it. One of my friends years ago told me of a prayer that he used to pray, and that stuck with me. And he said, the context of this was that God's going to get your attention if he needs your attention, if you're getting off track. And he used to pray, he'd say, God, help me hear when you whisper so that you don't need to shout. Right? You'd rather hear the soft word and make an adjustment than wait for God to have to get your attention in a harsher way. And I thought that was a neat way of phrasing it, and one that stuck with me. And we know that God is love, and we see here that that's his motivation behind these interventions. We can learn from this example in the same way when we're dealing with and working with our friends. Having close friends is a lot of fun. It can bring great joy to our lives. But as we've seen, being a friend also brings some responsibilities. Whether it's supporting our friend through a tough trial or bringing up a difficult topic when they make a mistake and sin. And of course, we've reviewed our responsibility to receive our friends gracefully when we're the ones who've slipped up. And we noted that this includes Jesus Christ himself, who also calls us his friends and is working with each one of us. As we conclude, I want to remind you of that first verse we read today. It's over in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 24. And it said that to have friends, we must be friendly. Upon our review today, I think we can say that if we want true friends, if we want faithful friends, if we want great friends, then we must fulfill our duties and be a true friend, a faithful friend, and a great friend. If we do, we can all make the most of this wonderful blessing of friends.